I'm just gonna jump right into it. We're supposed to be talking about scaling. So the first question I wanna ask you is, there are two ways to grow a company. You can either, just kind of reinvest your profits and organically, brick by brick, grow a company, or you can take venture capital and use it to fuel crazy hypergrowth. And that is obviously the path that Slack has chosen. How did you decide that was the right way to grow your company?
I guess part of it would be laziness, because when we started the company, it was 2009, and it was to do something totally different, a web-based, massively multiplayer game. And it was easy to raise money in contrast to any other previous venture I had, because it was good times in the economy and because we were coming off the success.
Wait, 2009?
Yeah, well, good times in the venture capital economy.
Okay.
The crazy little subset of a little subset. And if you can get $1.5 million for very little effort and a relatively small percentage of the company, it makes your life a lot easier than starting off and having the initial focus being making money. So I guess everything else is an elaboration of that, up to several $100 million in the bank.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's a big jump from that in 2009, raising $1 million, and what you did a couple weeks ago, valued at over $2 billion. Now, how much money do you have in the bank? You've hardly spent any of it. How did you make that decision?
Well, I have a lot of responsibilities, but I'm responsible to our employees, to our customers, to shareholders, to my partners, and the analysis was: are we better off to have 100% of what we have, or 94.3% of what we have, plus also $160 million? And the latter seemed like the more prudent choice. Honestly, it's not that we needed the money, it's that it's the cheapest time to ever raise money. So if you ever thought that you might want to raise money because bad shit might happen in the future, then this was a good time to do it. And I'll say this very quickly, but I was born in 1973. That was stagflation, which was economists thought was impossible. My father was a real estate developer and went bust in '82 because interest rates went to 18%. I graduated from high school in '91, into a bad recession. I worked through the dot-com crash. I lost a lot of money in 2008. So I'm very conscious of there being a cycle, and if money is very cheap, then I'll take it.
And the business side of things, why don't you kind of walk me through how that giant bank account that you now have is translating into how you're growing the company?
It actually doesn't have that much of an impact. I guess in this environment,
it's not burning a hole in your pocket. You're not dying to spend it.
No, and we're frugal is maybe overstating it, but we're definitely not spendy. But this is, one aspect of capital being super cheap in this crazy world, is that San Francisco is mental. So we leased a new office about a year ago for $65 a square foot, or $62 a square foot, and we had to move because we were growing really quickly. And 9 months later, we sublet it for $75. So $62 to $75 in 9 months, and salaries are like that. Everything is in this hyper-inflationary 20%, 40% a year kind of environment. So to have a company in San Francisco, you kind of have to do that.
So what's your biggest challenge? Aside from real estate, what's your biggest challenge right now in scaling Slack?
The biggest challenge is always people. It's the technology is especially compared to when we started Flickr, hardware is now essentially free, in comparison to 2003 prices. It's 98% cheaper. There's a lot more and better open source software that gets us a lot further. There's a lot more experienced developers who have done this before, and so it's easier. So the technological scaling component is not trivial, but it's close to trivial. But when, at the beginning of 2014, we were 14 people. At the end, we're 90 people. And now it's 130 people, and by the end of the year, it's going to be 250 to 280. And that's crazy, because every kind of practice that we develop for how to manage becomes obsolete in 60 days. So by the time we get a rhythm and feel okay, now we're doing the right thing, it's screwed, and we have to start all over again.
So, I mean, you're in a really unique situation to be observing this, because not only are you a company that's, experiencing hypergrowth, but you're also in the business of helping companies, communicate with each other. So maybe you can sort of give us some examples of what you've learned in studying, the communication within your own company, but also the way that all the companies that use your software communicate.
Sure. So how many people here use Slack?
Oh my God.
Yeah, that's crazy. But this is exactly kind of like the sweet spot for the audience. For our audience. Because you have a lot of people in tech, we have a huge number of people in creative industries and in media. But those of you who use it probably noticed that it's a big change in your behavior. And then we were really conscious of this in the early stages, that we were asking a lot of our customers. If we average over all of our daily active users, so including people who are just getting started or don't use it that much, they spend a little over 10 hours a day connected and 2 hours and 15 minutes in active use. So that's a big chunk of your time. And it's going to be the software that you spend the most time with over the course of the day, other than perhaps whatever you do as your job function. So that might be Photoshop, or that might be Excel, or that might be email, or it might be an IDE because you're writing code.
But the idea is that it's not going to be email, that you're going to kill email.
Well, no, we'll kill email inside of most organizations that use Slack over the long run, but we'll never kill email in the general sense, because it's the lowest common denominator. It's how you cross organizational boundaries. It's how we set up this talk right now, and how people like us will set up talks like this 5 years from now and 10 years from now. But there's sometimes a small group of people will take to Slack and it's just perfect and it's exactly what they wanted. Other times there's a lot of resistance, and sometimes the resistance is we did a bad job explaining what the functionality is, or we had bugs, or some people just don't like to change, or there were really significant workflows that were built up around the way people had communicated at that company or that organization over the course of decades. But sometimes there's just bad habits. And one of those is information hoarding, particularly by people in middle management positions that kind of protect their position by controlling who knows what and when. And one of the benefits of Slack is that it increases the sense of transparency. And I don't mean transparency in a political sense, like it's not Edward Snowden-like transparency, but it's that people can see into other parts of the organization and see what their peers are doing. And that can be threatening to some people, and it's usually only threatening when there's a bad situation. So I feel like it causes positive change.
I mean, it's interesting though, because not only are you, this is just it's not just a productivity tool. You're actually kind of taking a philosophy of how companies should operate and kind of forcing them a little bit into that.
That's okay. That's really interesting, because we deliberately try not to force the idea of a message inside of an organization being the lowest common denominator format. So it can be a person sending a message to another person, and they can be really long, elaborate, formatted, bulleted point messages, or it can just be like a question mark or just a single emoji or something like that. But we don't want to be prescriptive in how people use it. So that's a side effect of its usage is transparency, but it's not like we're trying to foist that on organizations who don't want it. And another place where that shows up is in kind of time and information management. So here's just a really quick example. We designed it initially so that you'd only get a notification if someone mentioned your name or if someone sent you a direct message, because the assumption was that they wanted your attention, and so you should get a notification. And otherwise, we won't give you a notification if there's just people talking in a channel, and we won't show you a number, because a number is just going to stress you out. But people would install the app and they'd sit next to each other, and someone would send a message to a channel and the other person would say, fuck, I didn't get a notification. This app is crappy, it's broken. Because what they expected was that every message would cause a notification. And so we had to set it up so that at first every message will cause a notification. And then once you get to, I think it's like 100 messages and 3 people on the team, you get a little message from Slackbot that says, hey, that's a pretty stressful set of preferences you have right now. How about we change it so that you only get notifications when someone mentions your name. And almost everyone will do that. Similarly, when you install the mobile app and enable push notifications, we say, hey, maybe you don't want to get email notifications anymore. We've just turned that off for you. And if you want to turn it back on, you can go here. There's a lot of that, because there's a lot, and we feel this, because when we first started making it, it was 8 people on the team. And we had designed literally the perfect product for teams of 8 people. Exactly. And if you were more than 8 people, sorry, it was terrible. And one of the very first external customers we had was Rdio, the music service, and they had about 100 employees. And God, we got so many complaints from them about this is impossible to manage, and there's too many channels, and there's all these problems. So it took us a little while to figure that out. But inside of our company, because you're growing so fast, it was the same problem that I just referenced about management. When it's 8 people, everyone weighs in on every decision. It doesn't matter whether it's your domain or not, like whether it's your expertise. Because only 5 out of the 8 will care about any particular decision, and it's fine for everyone to speak up, because the other 7 people can read the messages generated by that person. But when it gets exponentially harder to do that as you get bigger, so when we got to 40 people, and now there's like 36 people giving their opinion about the color of a button or something like that.
It's the equivalent of the email chain from hell.
Yeah. And also every single message that someone sends has to be, or doesn't have to be, but it often is read by many other people. So we got to the point where we had an internal memo, the title of which was Slack as a Distracting Menace. But it just meant we had to evolve how we used it and what the expectations were and what the kind of social protocols were. And we definitely feel that, because we get about 15,000 tweets a month from people.
15,000.
15,000, and about another 15,000 help tickets a month through Zendesk. And if you work at Slack, then every single person you know in the industry also uses Slack. So you go to dinner with some friends, and it's like, there's a bug, there's a feature request, bug, feature request. So we get a huge amount of feedback, and a lot of it is about that. It's like how to adjust the way we work and how to adjust the way we communicate to a system where anyone can send you a message at any time, including at 2 a.m.
Yeah. I mean, I just one note. I love the idea that Slackbot is kind of like the exact opposite of Clippy.
Right. It should be.
Like trying to help you instead of stress you out. So I want to talk about design, because I know that's kind of like a big feature of of this conference, and you have a design background. So I'd love to hear you kind of talk about how the skills of a designer are applicable to someone like you on the business side.
If any of you had ever heard my name before Flickr, and if you were in this industry like in 99, 2000, 2001, then maybe you heard of the 5K contest, which is something that I started in reaction to a designer who I managed who said, we were making templates, this is like 1998 or 1999, templates for some client of ours, and I said they had to be under 10 kilobytes for the naked template for the page. And he said, that's impossible, you can never do anything good. So I made a web design competition that was 5K. And I didn't really know this at the time, but it was part of this really big tradition of highly constrained design competitions and creative competitions in general. So there was like the 4K demo scene for graphics programmers. There's 2-color print design competitions for students in graphic design schools often. There's like the 48-hour filmmaking competitions and the 1-month novel writing. And if you back up a little bit and think about creative practice in general, often it's about the selection of constraints. So, in music, you have a tempo, you have a key that you're playing in. In poetry, you have a meter and you have a rhyme scheme often. And people will arbitrarily select constraints in order to highlight some aspect of it. There's I'm trying to remember his name now, but in Don Norman's book, The Design of Everyday Things, he quotes someone else in a letter who has a definition of design as, design is the successive application of constraints until only a unique solution remains. And so part of the process of design is to identify the constraints and then apply them in the right order. That's absolutely true in business all the time. I mean,
how are you doing that at Slack as the CEO?
Well, it's organizational design is a lot of it. So who do we need? How many people do we need? How do they work together? Like, at what point does there need to be another level of management in the organization? Who is missing from this team that's trying to get something done, and who do they absolutely need? Because there's a lot of organizational drift is the natural state. Like
organizational drift?
Drift, yeah. Like whatever is happening on Tuesday will be the thing that happens on Wednesday, except some random change that someone made.
Okay. So you're talking about staying focused also.
Yeah, staying focused and making sure that you're continually optimizing. And there's a bunch of constraints in business, obviously. And so we talked about this backstage.
No, obviously, that's not a constraint for you.
Yes, but you should be making money, and people should feel, like that they're doing work that's interesting to them, and that they're being recognized for it, and that they're motivated to do a good job, and all of that kind of stuff. But there's a very long-term, like a long-term design challenge where you don't get any feedback on whether the design of your organization is good or the design of your business model is good for like a year or 5 years or in some cases 10 years, because everything's easy in retrospect, but it's so, you have so little information at the time to make it.
So how do you keep yourself in check that way?
Lots of smart people that I work with and continually challenging one another. I mean, I get a lot of, I feel like incredibly fortunate in many ways, but incredibly fortunate that we got very good and supportive investors, and there's a lot of actual wisdom there. So people complain about VCs in the same way that people complain about lawyers. And like, there's lawyer jokes, there's VC jokes. Some of my best friends are lawyers. I don't mean that as like a euphemism or anything like that. Like, it's literally true. One of my best friends is a law professor here at Fordham. And the same thing can be true of VCs. They can give really good advice. But also we have a lot of...
You heard it here.
Yeah. We have a lot of employees who have a lot of different backgrounds. And
so one employee that you've told me that you specifically are not hiring is growth hackers. Can you tell me about why you hate that position?
It's so easy to fall into the trap of like maximizing for some local position or juking the stats in the wire.
Juking the stats.
Yeah, in the wire the wire's terminology. So a quick example of that is an email that Twitter would send that would give you the top 5 interesting tweets from your network today. And they would show you the tweet, but they didn't link directly to the tweet. They linked just to the timeline of the person who tweeted it. And the inference, and I'm almost positive this is why they did it, is because you would go click on the timeline and then you would try to find that tweet. And you would end up frustrated and angry at Twitter, but you spend a few more moments on the site, and so like when they did the A/B test, if some people got this email, some people got this email, they're like, oh, well, people who got this email spent a little bit longer on the site, and that's the result that I want, so that when my performance review comes up in April, I can say, we increased this number by 17%.
Yeah, that's very tricky, Twitter. All right, I think I have time for one more question, and I want to refer to something you just showed me, which is an article that you wrote for Design Magazine, and one of the pieces of advice you included was related to the mission, and like everybody needs to know why they're doing something. So can you tell everyone a little bit more about what that means?
Yeah, we 2.5, or not even quite, 2.25 years ago, we started development in Slack, and we ended up making again, a huge number of decisions that were based on very little information, so they could have gone either way. But the roadmap that we set out was exactly what we've done, and the mission that we chose then, which was to make people's working lives simpler, more pleasant, and more productive, is something that we can get behind. It's not like we're changing the world, or like saving people's lives or anything like that, but it is nice.
Wait, are you allowed to say that in Silicon Valley? You have to say we're changing the world.
We're changing the world and making the world a better place through office communication software. But there's 2 parts that come with that. So one part is the internal side, and one part is the external expression of that. So the number one quality of people we look for in hiring is empathy. Because if you can't empathize with people, you're not going to be able to do a good job in many things. I mean, not every job requires empathy, but it's a huge bonus, even if you're a back-end programmer. The outward expression of that is courtesy. And courtesy, not in a fake, polite way, but in genuinely trying to anticipate what people need. And it turns out that mission for the product is a great mission to turn back into the company, so that if all of us are continually trying to make each other's working lives simpler, more pleasant, and more productive, then you take a little bit more care in how you communicate something. If you're going to ask someone a question, you give them a little bit more context. If you're going to call a meeting, you have some result you want out of that meeting, and you communicate it in advance so people don't come and feel like they're wasting their time. And that trickles down into everything, that people should feel like they're being respected and they're being taken care of. If that manifests itself in the software, then people are going to love it and they're going to recommend it, and then the people to whom they recommend it will also love it and they'll also recommend it, which is the best case scenario. But also it'll be a good and healthy place to work.
It sounds like a great place to work. All right, well, that was really insightful. We have like 14 seconds left. So everybody please join me in thanking Stewart.